I guess we just go live. That's what we do. We click live. I chortle a bit at the way I've called this live value bunging. That's delightful to me. Now live. Come as Adam bungs value down your throat. Bung is a good word. It doesn't get enough play. Let's open. What do we do here? Open link in new window, so I can kind of see all the people watching me. That's what I'm doing this for. I'm doing this for people. I'm not going to do a damn thing that's entertaining until I see, okay, I see an eyeball. It's time to get entertaining here. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do anything entertaining. I'm going to click this. I'm going to mute myself. There we go. All right. It's all coming together. Morning, everyone. I'm just going to finish this coffee in this mermaid mug. This mermaid mug and I we have a fascinating history that you probably aren't that interested in hearing, but it's getting bunged into you. This as a shape of mug, I think is dumb. Like that's just a shape that takes away from stability. I think it should probably be the other way around, like an upside down pyramid. Hey, David, thanks for your question or your request today for a thing for me to talk on for a topic. I do like this. The mermaid tail is pretty cool. This would not be very hydrodynamic to swim through the ocean either. Like pretty clumsy design evolution. Proof against intelligent design, frankly, this mug. Like, anyhow, I'm getting fairly off topic. What is my topic? I don't have one yet. I will bring a topic in though. You can see them over here. How did I get on this? I don't know. I'm gonna finish this coffee. Oh, this is what I like about this. It's big. So when I get coffee in the morning, it's a big coffee. Then I'm gonna have to go back to the machine and get more coffee. So that's pretty cool. Mmm, such a good refutation against intelligent design. The fundamental religious person's nightmare. This mug, the mug that fundamental preachers hate. Okay, I'm having fun. I'm going to start talking about real stuff shortly. I just want to finish this coffee and get it in you. How dare you disparage the mermaid mug? Love you, Bay. For real though, that is silly design, right? It's small at the bottom, and I am giving it props. I'm giving it some props. Okay, it's time to switch to a different mug. So we've now got this mug, which shows the white rabbit. Look at him. This guy's late yet again. Actually, he looks like he's right on time, doesn't he? It's 5 o'clock on his little clock. Hello, John. Intelligent design is about functionality. Aha, exactly. And so hence, bam, this is the debate ender. Anyhow, I don't want to get into intelligent design. I find that subject somewhat fascinating, but not for the reason most people are fascinated by it. I'm banned from using the mermaid mug. That's not going to handle. John, your words hurt. You know, my fingers are not too big. They're the perfect size. And I've gotten, people have said, show us your fingers. What perfect sized fingers? So that's just me. Let's let's get into the topics here because I'm rapidly. What you're seeing is the erosion of my marriage, based on the conversation going with Bay here. I'm belittling her mugs. It's tense. Don't want to keep doing that. So let's talk about these topics. Oh, we got to pour the tea. We got to drink the tea first. So here's our mug. Got some milk in there with some tea. We're gonna just top it up so we get the live pouring effect. Okay, let's have our first sip of the morning. Nice, pretty good. That sip of tea is a great big fuck you to Friday the 13th. People are like, oh, Friday the 13th, bad things happen. Well, nothing happened bad there. That tea was delicious. So I like to think of that as the ultimate fuck you to Friday the 13th. Off to a great start. Killing it, crushing it. Good morning, Andrew. Morning, John. Morning, Bay. Morning, David. I actually have some stuff to talk about that is not just me being silly. Let's just do a quick check-in first. So what's real for me this week is I've been really present to the feeling of being full, my life being very full, but not busy. It's a distinction between those two. So I haven't, there's just a lot that I've got going on. There's a lot I'm creating in the world. There's a lot of possibility I'm present to. There's a lot that I'm bringing into the world that I'm making happen. Happy birthday, Andrew. That tea drink was not the ultimate fuck you to your birthday. just to be clear. Um, and the fact that it's your birthday is also another fuck you to Friday the 13th being a bad day. So it kind of works. Anyhow, life's been feeling very full. There's a many things that I'm doing. And what happens when life is full, when I'm owning a lot, and as a leader, as you broaden, as you expand your capacity to lead, what that means is that you expand your capacity to cause things to happen in the world and to own them. Owning them doesn't mean you're doing them. This is where people get tripped up when they get promoted into a position that calls forward more leadership from them. Is like, you'll have an engineer get promoted into a management position, and the engineer, instead of causing and owning more things, they're still trying to do all of it. And that just, it can't work. It falls to pieces. And so what that means is, as a leader, me owning something means, like, if I'm owning, let's say, the graphics that I produce, I create a lot of infographics and stuff like that, share those in my practice. And so these days, I have a designer that I work with who does a lot of that work. I still have to, like, create it. I've got to proofread it. I come up with a design, sort of a rough, low fidelity prototype. Then I hand it over to her, and then we partner together to get the finished product. I'm the leader in all of this. It's my project, so I'm owning that from start to finish. It doesn't mean that I'm sitting over her shoulder criticizing what she's doing as she's doing it. It means that I am committed to this happening, and I will make sure that happens one way or the other. The way I'm committed to causing that to happen is by supporting her, checking in with her. If she's not letting me know, she's very good about this, so I don't have to do this much. But, like, if I gave her something and I didn't hear from her for 3 weeks, as the person owning this, I'm going to check in with her and be like, hey, is there something you need? What's going on? Can we talk about this? I noticed it's taking a while. And at the end of the day, if I really, like, if she fell through and I was really committed to owning this, which I am, then I might take it on board myself and be like, okay, I've got to finish this because I'm committed to this deadline. Or I might find someone else and hire them in. So that's what ownership means, is that I'm, at the end of the day, the one responsible for making it happen, not for doing it, for ensuring that it gets done. So as we expand our capacity to own more, it means we can hold space for more things going on. And what I notice, this is going to come back to feeling busy versus feeling full. What I notice is that when I get scared of everything I'm owning, when it starts to be pushing up against the capacity that I currently have for what I can own, that's when I start to shift into this experience of busyness. That's when I start to, rather than enjoy the spaciousness I've created while still moving things forward, I start to get frantic. I just spat on my screen, so I'm going to clean that off a little bit. I start to get frantic. I start to get really worried that I'm not doing enough. And then I start to, like, spend more and more time doing things. So it's an interesting space that I found myself in this week, noticing and reveling in the fullness that is available, and really consciously choosing not to go down that path of, like, being busy, of being really, I've got to do all this stuff. This is necessary. If you're expanding your capacity, you have to lean into this, right? It's kind of like, imagine if you were at the gym and you didn't like the feeling of your muscles shaking because you made it mean something. You're like, oh, my muscles shaking, it's embarrassing, I don't like that. And so then what you did was you only ever lifted weights for which your muscles didn't shake. So you just kept lifting the same weights. You're never going to grow your capacity because you're unwilling to be with the impact, the feeling, the experience of when you're past your capacity. So those of us committed to leadership, those of us committed to expanding ourselves, to growing beyond what we're currently capable of, we have to be willing to push out past that. And so how that looks for me is often feeling full, starting to get a little busy, catching that hopefully as soon as I can. Sometimes it takes a while, and then, like, oh, what do I need to do? What do I need to create? What do I need to choose back into to drop the busyness and just be with the fullness of what life is currently putting in front of me? So that's been really live for me this past week. There's been a lot of conversations I've been in as we come to the December break. December and June, I take off every year, and always without fail, right around this time is when suddenly It seems like everyone that's wanted to have a conversation with me but hasn't asked for one yet now asks for it. So November is almost packed in. Bonjour, Emmanuel. Thank you. I appreciate that. What do you go by for short? Do you go as Emma? Do you go as Emmanuel? Emmanuel the White? Ms. White? Mademoiselle White? Let me know. Um, so everyone starts to book in at this point. November's already mostly booked out, I notice. And the other thing that drives up for me is this desire to serve everyone, and at the same time recognizing, oh, there is a boundary, there's a limit to, there's a finite amount of service I can provide. Emmanuel, okay, great. I'm pretty sure I've asked you that before too, I think. There's a finite amount of service I can provide, and in order to create the life I'm committed to creating, there's a point where I have to say, hey, sorry, it's going to be January. And it's always challenging for me because of two reasons. One reason, the more empowering reason that I love sharing with you, is because I want to serve people. I want to provide people value. The other reason, which is less empowering, is because I still very much am someone who has fear. That's never been eradicated, and I don't believe it ever will. And what my fear says is, hey, you gotta talk to them now. If you make them wait, they're gonna lose interest, and then you won't get them as a client, or whatever it happens to be. And so I recognize both of those. I distinguish, oh yeah, there's my fear trying to get me to book more and more people in and throw away this month I'm committed to taking off. And there's also the desire of me to really serve people, and there's a degree of scarcity there too. Like, if I could just serve everyone, then there'll be this point where there's not so many people I have to serve, or some flavor of that. And so both of those are not really what I'm committed to. What I'm committed to is serving the world, not reacting from fear, and taking abundance of time off so that I can then come back and create an abundance of service. So we have to have that balance, or at least I do. Maybe you don't. Maybe you've hacked the system. Let's dive into these juicy topics that I promised I was going to bung down your throat aggressively. Hit that table to start us off. So I asked for some topics just this morning, and Andrew, Carl, and David were generous enough to provide some. So I want to really make sure I address those. Thank you, David, Carl, Andrew, for doing so. It's so helpful, and it's nice because then it's not just me coming up with shit to talk about. We're like co-creating, which is way more fun. It's always way more fun. I was talking with my friend Michelle this morning, and she's starting a podcast. Michelle Aiken, who's a great coach and someone worth following in her own right. And she was sharing how she's bringing people on to interview. And then I shared with her, if she didn't bring me on, I'd be very hurt, which is true. But that's okay. Never mind that. We were just reflecting on how the nice thing about bringing people in for an interview format is there's less you have to create in the moment, or sorry, there's less you have to create up front. With Get Lit, I write these episodes. They take a long time to put together, to the point where I'm noticing I'm procrastinating. And this will come back to the shadow you asked about, Carl. But with an interview format, you just kind of show up with that person, and then it gets created in the moment. That's the magic of conversation. Many of us, from our fear, will sit down and write out a whole bunch of stuff for that conversation, but you don't have to do that. All we really have to do is be with that other person, and the magic of creation between two people it comes into the space. So when you guys, girls, whoever provide these sort of topics, it's beautiful because there's a degree of co-creation. It takes some of the burden off of me. So I'm very grateful. So let's see here. The first thing I'm going to talk about is a coaching specific topic. It's the one Andrew brought. And so I'll just read what he wrote, which is I'm going to paraphrase a bit. How do you develop the confidence and experience in knowing that we can coach in all areas and not just a specific niche? I really feel like I excel at coaching in certain areas, mindset, time management, whereas in other areas, for example, dating, divorce, I fumble a bit more. So how do we as coach support people in all the areas of their lives rather than just those that we feel confident about? So the first thing we have to do here is introduce a distinction, and that is a distinction between doing and being. So, and most people get this wrong. I'm going to start by, most people get this wrong. Most people think this means Well, what I do as a coach is I just talk to people about how they feel in the moment and we focus on them feeling the right way and then everything takes care of itself. It's not really the work to be done. I think we leave a lot on the table when we approach it that way. But here's what is important. There's the doing is the content of my life. The doing is the stuff that's sort of happening on the surface. If you imagine I'm this three-dimensional being that exists in this space, then the doing is like this thin veneer that is overlaid over top of the fullness of who I am as a human being. So right now, you could say that what I'm doing is speaking live in front of a camera and it's being recorded and blah, 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 blah. Underneath that is who I'm being as I do that particular thing. So let's say that I have a story about myself that people aren't interested in me. So we could sort of, well, why does Adam have that? We could explore the why, but that's not really important. It's a red herring. So we're going to just drop that for now. And we're going to start from the premise that I've got this story about myself that who I am is someone that people are not interested in listening to. So that's the being. The being is kind of the internal state. It's everything that's going on below the surface. And the being, just like if you imagined like you had, I don't know, some shape like this, and then you draped a cloth over it, the cloth is naturally going to take the shape of the object that it's draped over top of. So if the object looks like this, the cloth will sort of sink in and settle into these valleys and sit above these mountains. And so you're going to have an object that looks a bit like this. It might be somewhat obscured because gravity won't pull it fully down. But the point here is that that thing you put on the surface is shaped by what lies beneath. And so too is our doing shaped by the being underneath. Now, the thing is that as humans, where we look is the doing. So we look at this cloth and we're like, what do I do with a purple cloth to make it look nice? Oh, with purple, you have to iron it a certain way. So blah, blah, blah. But all of that would be kind of missing the point. Because as long as this object underneath is shaped like this, it doesn't matter what you really do with the purple cloth, it's going to be dictated to some extent by that object underneath, the way it shows up, the way it looks. It's a bit of a clumsy metaphor. I hope you guys are following along. Let me know if this is getting confusing or you're not totally with me. So our being shapes the doing. So now we'll bring this back to what I'd said about my story. If the part of the way I'm being is from this story that people aren't interested in what I have to say, that's going to show up in the way I'm doing any particular thing. So for example, if I was doing this live, if I had a belief that people weren't interested in what I was going to say, I might do one of a couple of, there's a million different things I could do, but we're going to narrow it down to two choices. One of the things that I might do is go over the top to be crazy and wacky and like super entertaining. You guys ever been around these people where you're like, could you turn the fucking show down? It's exhausting. Like, I get it. Yeah, you're funny. Stop it, please. It's uninteresting. It's loud and tedious. So we might turn our volume way up to overcome the internal dialogue we have that who I am is someone people are not interested in listening to. And if who I am is someone that people are not interested in listening to, then I've got to do some excess stuff to make sure I hold their attention. The other, thanks, Mark, very helpful. The other thing that I might do is really like lean into this story that, well, people aren't going to find me interesting. So I'm just going to like I'm going to wrap myself up in that. So I'm just going to speak really boring and I'm going to make, if people aren't showing up, I'm not going to make that mean anything other than I'm boring. And I'm going to probably talk in a boring way because why bother do anything different? So we tend to like react to, resist, and try to fix this story, this way of being, or we fully embrace it and sort of like, well, got it. People don't find me interesting. So where do we go from here? So that's an example of how my being is determinative. The way that you experience me in this conversation is going to be a function of who I'm being underneath of what I'm doing. Now, that story about myself, that way of being that I show up to the world as, is not only going to have an impact here when I'm live, it's also going to have an impact in the way that I show up on public speaking. If I'm standing in front of a group of people, it's going to show up the way that I experience and express myself when I'm talking to a clerk at a grocery store. Maybe there's a conversation where it's kind of interesting, but I'm like, I know that this person doesn't find me interesting. And so I abruptly end the conversation to spare them having to sit through a boring conversation with me. I'm not making this up anymore, by the way. This is exactly what I did. I used to have this real story that people like you, Adam, but they're only interested in a little bit of you. It's nice to meet you, but then it gets awkward and uncomfortable and weird. So the thing I learned to do was I would look for every single indication that they'd reached the end point. And they might look at their watch, which really just meant they were curious about the time, but I would attach the meaning I had internally to the actions, the things that were happening externally. So when someone looked at their watch, that was a clear indication that they were bored of this conversation with me, at which point I would abruptly end it, which was fucking weird and left people like, what? That was weird. Okay. That guy's awkward and uncomfortable, I guess, thereby proving the truth of the story that I'm trying to fight against. So who we're being is functional and determinative regardless of what we're doing. Now we're going to bring this back to Andrew's question, which is, well, how do I coach people where I feel really confident in some areas, but not in other areas? So what most coaches do is, most coaches and frankly leaders and consultants and so on and so forth, is they attach their value, the value that they believe they're providing, to like helping people change their doing. Oh, what you're doing in your sales script, you need to do it differently. Instead of asking that question, ask this question. And changing our doing will have a degree of effectiveness. Just like if I have that cloth sinking down here and I starch it, it's going to balance on top of these points a little bit better until as time goes on, the starch starts to wear off and then it's going to start to reshape itself and fit the underlying quality of being. So when coaches are like, I'm a dating coach, what they're doing is they're putting their attention on the doing of this particular person. Now, it doesn't mean you can't address being underneath it and that might just be the thin edge of the wedge. You're like, you start talking about people's dating life and you're very clear early on, like, oh, you've got a story, people think you're ugly. Nothing's going to change while that story's there. Let's move that. But what tends to happen is we call ourselves experts in certain areas. I'm an expert in time management. And so then rather than really get underneath the doing and learn how to see the being and work with that, we give people tools and tricks and techniques designed to make them better at managing their time. Here's an example of how that fails. Lawyers, my background, law, lawyers are insane about time management, and they are very insistent that they need better time management. Let me tell you something about lawyers. They manage their time down to blocks of 6 minutes, 1/10 of an hour. So these are people that are clear on what they're doing every 6 minutes. Now they make some guesses, et cetera, but you and I probably don't do that very much. So these are people that are hyper focused on time management. And they want more time management. They want to be better at balancing their time, managing their time, because they have this belief that if they could just manage their time better, then they would do the stuff that they don't seem to have time to do right now that they say they want to do, like more presence with their kids or loving their partner or blah, 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 blah. What do you think would happen if we got those lawyers an extra hour, right? We use time management to structure their time even more efficiently, and now they have this hour. I'll tell you what will happen because I've seen it time and again. The being hasn't shifted, and so whatever way of being has them filling their time so tightly in the first place is going to continue to operate. And so you give them an extra hour and they're just going to fill it with more work because all we've done is change the surface. We've not addressed the shape of who they're being in the world underneath. This is why working with doing provides short-term results at best, short-term temporary change. And that temporary change does feel good. It's just that it's limited and it's time bound and it doesn't really get us much in the long term. So how do we work with someone when we feel comfortable in one area but not in another? The thing is that what we want to do is we want to look at who the person is being in this area. So if someone's like, I don't know, got a time management problem. They're like, I never have time for intimacy in my life. I'm always working. And if we start to really work with this person, we're gonna, thanks, Emmanuel. That's really good feedback. I want you to know I appreciate that. Both you and Mark. Thank you both. It helps me work through this. Um, so you guys are serving me. It's important you know that. You're serving me when you share that. So what we would start to do with this person who's like, I never have time for intimacy or whatever, is we'd get curious not about the things they're doing necessarily, but what's the internal story? What's the being? What is the shape of this person's being in the world? What is the beliefs they have about themselves? And if we can start to, thanks, Lindsay, if we can start to see this, we're going to start to notice that that way of being shows up in all areas of their life. However you be in one place in your life, you are being in other places of your life. If I have a belief that emotions are inefficient, that anger has no place, I promise you that that's going to mean that at work, I'm fairly unimpactable and can't really touch on, I can't go into the stuff that I might be taking on because it might drive up some anger. And I'm also going to be a little bit distanced from my partner because I can only let them impact me to the extent that I'm able to control and manage my anger. And anytime they get like, I have to keep a degree of distance from them so that I don't become angry because I have a story that anger is wrong and unproductive and inefficient. And so this is the way that like whatever is presenting on the surface, we meet the client there. We don't tell them it's all a bunch of bullshit. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the icebergs, blah, 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 blah. We meet them where they're at. But the thing that's important to really understand, to really get for yourself in this is that deep transformational work is almost never about that cloth on the surface, or at least the place we begin is never about that cloth. It's the shape underneath. And so that's what you do, Andrew. You get curious about the shape underneath. What's your story about, you talk about dating and divorce. Tell me how dating and divorce goes. What's the beliefs about dating people? Well, it's kind of a waste of time. Oh, interesting. We've already heard that like it's a waste of time, and I guarantee you that's going to start to trace back to the relationship to time management too. So from this, you start to see like, wow, you can really coach people on anything because you're not coaching the thing on the surface. You're coaching the way this human being shows up to life. That's the heart of good transformational work. Andrew, no worries about less comments. I'm glad this is landing. Now, here's the important thing. We still want to create a niche because that allows us to resonate with people. And the way that we want to do that, the way most people create their niche is there's like, remember the shape, and then there's the cloth draped over the shape. And most people aim their niche at the cloth draped over the shape. So they'd be like, I coach lawyers wanting to leave their job. Very specific thing that lawyer wants to do, right? Very specific. The more powerful place to come from our niche is to begin with the shape underneath. So we'd start, like if I was looking at my niche, I'd be like, well, I work with people who are really brilliant. And I'm only just describing myself, just to be clear here. I work with people that are really brilliant, have huge hearts, and learn that that huge heart is a liability. And so what we learn to do is run everything up through our head. We don't feel stuff, we think about stuff. We don't feel what we're feeling, we analyze what we're feeling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're welcome, Vera. Nice to have you with us. And so from there, we're starting to get a shape of this thing underneath, this quality of being. And now we can start to ask ourselves questions like, where do people who are closed off from their heart and running everything through their heads, what kind of careers would they find themselves in? Well, probably law. It would really serve you as a lawyer to be able to stand in front of the court and have no connection to your heart because you're going to be able to deliver like a perfect facsimile of a computer delivering an argument. It's like perfection. It's like the best chess player, almost like a robot. And that person can argue and call me stupid and nothing's going to get in because I'm severed from my heart. So we're going to find them there. But what might be the impact of this career ostensibly about helping people, but where they're totally cut off from their heart? Well, they might be feeling kind of a lack of fulfillment. What was the impact on me when I was doing that? Well, I was doing a lot of drugs. I was drinking a lot because that gave me a sense of the freedom and the expression I really craved. What else? And so what we do when we're approaching a niche this way is It's not that we forgo the cloth on top, it's that we begin by building this being underneath. We get clear, what's the being of my people in the world? Then we can start to see like what are the shapes of the cloths draped over that being. And that gives us a really powerful niche where we don't just say, oh, I work with lawyers. We say, well, I work with people who are brilliant, incredible heads, huge hearts. They learn to shut those hearts off and run everything through their head. And so they don't tend to feel so much at this point in their life. They tend to think, and they don't feel what they're feeling. They think what they're feeling. And they don't really have a lot of intimacy in their life because there's no room for it. It's kind of inefficient. And where those people tend to find themselves is often in careers where that's rewarded. The practice of law, the practice of medicine, the practice of executive leadership, where all these things are really valuable skills. And so they're excelling in their careers, but at the same time, they're feeling like there's something missing. There's more to life than what they've currently got. Those are the people I work with. So you notice it's not that I forgo law and say I coach everyone. It's that I build the person from the bottom up rather than going from the top down, rather than just starting at like where they find themselves in their life. And then, yeah, that's what I do with people. I work on them with time management. Okay. That feels good. Carl asks about, he says he just listened to this week's Get Lit podcast. If you don't listen to Get Lit, you should. It's a great podcast by this guy. We have guests, we have live coaching where I break down some of what's going on in the coaching conversation. And we talk about, I talk about distinctions around leadership, 20-minute distinctions, really great stuff. And so Carl's asking, like, it would be cool to hear more about how I work with my shadow, with the shadow that I have. So the most recent podcast was this week was about the quality of being that is presence and radiance. So people with, I'm going to describe this quality of being. It's a quality I have, and you'll probably notice just as I'm describing it, be like, oh, I can totally get that Adam has that. So I'll describe the quality and then I'll talk about its shadows and how they show up for me and what I do with them. So the quality of presence and or radiance, I use both of those words, usually because masculine people with more masculine energy tend to resonate with the quality of presence. People that identify more with the feminine energy tend to resonate more with radiance, but they're really the same quality. So the quality of presence and or radiance is it's the X factor in celebrity. It's that quality of being where we're drawn to notice someone. It's like the quality of certain people to like get noticed. They're in the room the moment they enter it. They come into the room and we're all like, whoa, who's that person? And when they leave, we're like, oh, that person just left. And when they speak, we hear their voice. You can even tell like that quality is present in the sound of my voice. I have a pretty sonorous voice. It's a voice that gets heard, that gets noticed. And so people with this quality naturally end up in careers that would reward getting noticed. So like most celebrities tend to have this quality. Most people on radio tend to have this quality. They have a voice that gets noticed, that gets heard. Anything else I want to say about this? Sometimes people are like, oh, you mean good looking? Kind of. People with this quality tend to be good looking, but not necessarily handsome or beautiful, more that they're good to look at. They draw our eye towards them. So the example I really like to use often is, it's kind of two. There's Adam Driver, who played Kylo Ren in Star Wars, who's like a classic example. You know, that guy is, I look at him and I'm like, he's not classically leading man good looking, and yet I keep wanting to look at his, there's something here, like I can't look away. It's not to say he's ugly, it's just that my eyes are drawn to him, even if he's not stereotypically handsome. I'm happy to be wrong about that too, but I think he's a great example of it. And I cannot remember her full name, but the artist named Frida, the Mexican artist who you've probably seen the images of her, she's got like a real unibrow. She does a lot of her art looks like that. And a woman with a lot of radiance, but maybe not typically beautiful by our standards. So the shadows of this particular quality, presence and radiance, are twofold, like all shadows. And the shadows are always, they're like They're a function of the fear of what we are innately being either too much or not enough. So they are, you can think of it like a horseshoe. They kind of wrap around and they get very close at the bottom, even though they occur like opposites. So people with presence, Frida Kahlo, thank you so much, Farah. Kahlo? Kahlo? I can't remember. Anyhow, that's the woman. So people who have the quality of presence, our eyes are drawn to them and they want eyes on them. We want people to notice them. I don't like when I do a live and I have one person. I want 30 people watching me. I like the attention. So that's part of our inherent quality. We like the attention. We desire it. And as you can imagine, growing up, we're often trained out of this. The training we get is like, you're being too much. Stop showing off. Stop hogging the spotlight. And there's times when that's really good feedback. Like, stop talking all the time, Adam. You're not letting anyone else have room. But we overcompensate. So we make it mean, oh, who I am fundamentally is wrong. And so from there, we get the underexpressed part of our shadow, which is like, oh, I got to dim myself. I got to keep myself small. I won't take up space. Which, as you can imagine, it'd be like if Brad Pitt was off in the side of the room, being like this weird wallflower, kind of like acting really shy. You know, it would just be bizarre because we're like, dude, every woman in this room and a lot of the men are staring at you, wanting you to be in the space, and you're sort of being small. It's weird. It's like an elephant hiding behind a blade of grass. The other side of this shadow is we learn we're not enough. We're not taking up enough space. So one example of how this could get created is if a child is put into a lot of performances as a child. Their parents put them into stage work, performances, auditions, and they learn like, oh, because they don't get every audition and because of the pressure the parent puts on them, they learn, oh, it's not enough just the way I am normally. I got to turn this shit up even more. And so these people, you'll notice like the tendency can be that they need all the attention on them always. There's no room for anyone else because someone else getting attention is a threat to their internal need for being seen and validated. And so these people will take up all the space in the conversation. You're sort of with them and it's kind of fun, provided you enjoy being a part of the Adam show. But if you want to have a different conversation that's not a part of the Adam show, you got to leave. You can't really hang out with me because I'm taking up all the space. And I'll draw you in, but I'm controlling it. I'm the one owning the conversation. So this would be the flip side. This would be the overexpressed part of presence, radiance is shadow. Okay, we've laid the groundwork. How's this show up for me? So the first step in all of this is like really being cognizant of this fact. And in order for me to really be cognizant of my shadows, the first thing I have to do is own that I've got them. And even before I get there, I have to own that I want people to notice me. So we're trained out of that. What we tend to get trained into is like, don't be a hog of attention. And then we attach that to like this desire to be noticed, to take up some space. And so where you find a lot of people who have this quality is simultaneously wanting your attention and at the same time insisting to you and themselves that they don't need that attention, which creates a real fucked up dynamic. It's weird and schizophrenic and it's obnoxious. It's like someone who's like, oh, I don't need recognition. You know, you try to acknowledge them. They're like, oh, thanks, but it's not really me. And then they spend the next 10 minutes slyly talking about their accomplishments. And you're like, well, do you want recognition or not? Because this is weird. You're telling me you don't, but then you're boasting. That's strange. So the first step we have to do is like, let me talk about me. The first step I've had to take on is like owning, oh, I want attention. I thrive in it. I love attention. It's pleasing to me. It feels good. The second stage is recognizing like I can go overboard with that and I can also shy away from it. So starting to see those shadows in my life. And what'll happen, my work is to recognize no matter how much I try to not have a shadow, that's kind of a fool's errand. It'd be if the sun was up there in the sky shining and trying its hardest not to cast any shadows anywhere. It's like, well, that's inherently impossible. Like by virtue of what you are, sun, shadows will be cast. There is no way you could do that unless you confined yourself to a very small little space free of anything other than you. Then you could kind of get away with not having a shadow, which is what most of us end up ironically kind of doing in our lives. We contain ourselves, we confine ourselves because we've become so allergic to the impact and the fear of being what we hate the most, which is our shadows. So I have to fall in love with these parts of myself. I have to really, what I mean by that is have a lot of compassion for the fact that there's going to be times when I suck all the air out of the room. It's going to be times when I take up too much space, when I'm showing up in such a way that it doesn't leave room for other people. And there's going to be times when I'm like, when I leave people kind of disappointed because I'm that elephant hiding behind that blade of grass. And if I'm actively making myself wrong for showing up in those shadows, it makes it really hard for me to distinguish when I'm doing it. Because as long as you're making yourself wrong for something, you now have a vested interest to not see yourself doing it. The more wrong you make something, the more inclined you are going to be to find excuses or reasons why you're not doing the thing you're doing. This is how a blind spot works. This is why we are what we judge. Whatever we hate the most in the world is what is impossible for us to see when we are doing it. And consequently, it then gets into our blind spot, and then it can just show up, and we have no ability to do anything about it. So, for me, when we're talking about presence and radiance, I got to really learn to have a lot of compassion for myself. Like, oh man, there's going to be times when I'm just going to suck the air out of the room. Not because I'm a jerk, not because I'm intending to do that, but probably because I'm scared. And it's just going to be a function. Like I take up a lot of space. And sometimes I'm just not going to be, hey, Mia, I'm not going to be like on it. And that's okay. So I've got to have a lot of space for myself. We all do. And then what I do is try to be really gracious when people are, I say try because it's hard. It's a practice of humility. But try to be really gracious when people are willing to be courageous enough to give me feedback about how I showed up. So one example of that is, let me have a sip of tea, wet the whistle. Ooh, yeah. One example of that was maybe about 9 months ago, maybe even a year. Time's been flying with COVID. It's crazy. It like slowed to a crawl in March and then it just went, now you're in November. So I was out for, I know this was pre-COVID. I was out for lunch with two friends. And um, my recollection of that lunch was like, it was just fun. We were joking around, having fun. But I found out at the end, one of the two friends there, she'd had someone close to her was either sick or had passed away. And I was like, oh, I brought my best sort of, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. Really just brought love because I understood. And then said goodbye to them and walked off and did whatever I was doing next during that day. And the next morning, my friend, the other friend who hadn't had someone close to them ill or pass away, he sent me a text and he said, "Hey, are you open to some feedback?" Yes, it is, Mia. And so I was in my car and I sort of pulled over and looked at the text message. I'm like, oh fuck, oh fuck. People rarely are like, "Are you open to some feedback?" You're awesome. It happens sometimes, but that's not necessarily my relationship to feedback. And so I was like, oh boy, okay, I'm gonna pull over, take a breath. What's he got? And what he shared was like, I really felt like you kind of took up all the space and like didn't leave any room and yeah, it I really didn't like it. And boy, so first of all, I'll share the process that went on was like my first thought was like, well, motherfucker, you kind of just sat quietly. Like you didn't really do anything. So what am I meant to do? Just sit in silence? Like defensive. Defensive and pointing to something legitimate on the other side of the table. This is so important that we get this. You can always point to something on the other side of the table and you're always going to be right about it. The reason you're always going to be right about it is because you can see something. This is why coaching is sacred and not the same as just having a friend. It's why like, oh, I've got a friend who's a coach. No, it's not the same. I don't care how coachy they are. Because in a friendship, we don't have an agreement set up that I'm going to go over here and do my work, but then my job's to reflect to you. to be a shiny being, a shiny mirror to just reflect to you. And that's what happens in coaching. In friendship, when I get that feedback, I do the thing that I do as a human being, which is like, motherfucker, motherfucker, that's you. That's you. You weren't taking up any space. I felt exhausted. I was working so hard to fill the space because no one else, it was dead air. So that was the first reaction. And then my second was like, okay, it doesn't feel good to hear, and I want to fight against it and point to how it's there, but there's something in this for me. If only just if the only sign of that is like the reaction, the visceral reaction I'm having, that's a strong indicator. Anytime it's a hint for me. Anytime I'm defensive and want to point to how that's your stuff, great, time to take a look. That's a time for me to take a look. And the better you get in this work, the more important it is to recognize that. Because the more masterful you become as a coach and a leader, the more you will see over on the other side. And that will make it harder to receive the feedback that the world is providing you. Because you're just going to be like, no, This is how cults of personality, cultship, and like followers get created, is because you have these people that become leaders, like Zen leaders, or like a friend of mine, Toku, described his time in a Zen monastery. Eventually, said it was like really narcissistic. Or Keith Raniere, who ran Nexium. You have these leaders who have done a bunch of work, but then they stop and they become very masterful at reflecting something on your side, but they're not doing their own work anymore. And so when you bring something to them, it always gets put back onto you. Well, here's what that thing is. Here's what you're doing. Here's what, and so then it becomes eventually what happens is that leader's ego takes over because they can't receive any further feedback. They can't take a look. So I'm really conscious of this. When I get feedback, I have a lot of defensiveness because I'm very human. And then I try my best to set it down. I bring it to my coach if I'm having a hard time doing that so that I can take a look at it and really receive it and really got like, no, no, no. Doesn't matter what I can see over there. That is for another time. What matters is that the universe is providing me a gift right now. The universe is saying, it's tapping me and saying, hey, buddy, take a look at this. And so what I did with my friend, and this is not a script, but this is what I did, was the first thing I said, wow, thanks for bringing this to me. I always want to acknowledge any kind of feedback because it's a courageous thing. It's very generous to get feedback, even when it doesn't feel good to get, especially when it doesn't feel good to get. It's a lot easier not to give you feedback, especially when my friend was like pretty gracious about giving it, right? It's not like he said, fuck you, you suck. It's not feedback like that. So I wrote him and I said, hey, I got it. And I'm sorry. And I'd love to talk about this because I really want to, I want to grow from this. And it's true. I do. I want to take my commitment as a man of presence is that when I come into a room, more people's innate presence, like everyone becomes more of a presence in that room. What from our fear, what our shadows, the shadows of presence, what they do is they have us either shrink ourselves down to nothingness so everyone else's presence can show up, or blow ourselves up to a bag of gas so that we're the only presence in the room. So it becomes all or nothing. It's either all Adam or no Adam and everyone else. And my commitment is that by expressing my presence responsibly and to the best extent I can and working with whatever's showing up in the moment, that everyone has this experience when Adam comes in the room, wow, I feel like a bigger person too, rather than it's fun because Adam's big and I admire that about him, but I can't wait till he goes away and then I can get to be big. That's not the impact I'm trying to have. And so I sat down with my friend and I, he started to share and I asked him like, tell me, what was the impact on you? Like, I get what I was doing. Can you let me know how that was landing with you? Where did that leave you? Because I wanted to know not just, oh, I did a thing, but what was happening? What was the impact I was having from showing up that way? And he was gracious enough to share. And so I just acknowledged like, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing this. And I really get it. I know that this is true about me, and I know it's hard for me to see. I want you to know it's a bit of a blind spot, not like an excuse, like so I'm just going to keep doing it, but like I need people to share it with me so I can catch it in the moment. It's really hard. And then on the other side of that, not because it was a requirement, but then my friend started to take a look on his side. That's part of what becomes available when we do the work, when we model um, looking on our side from unattachment. Most of the time, we look on our side from attachment. It's like, well, I'm willing to look over here, but if only if you look over there. And usually we go one step even more attached, which is like, well, you tell me what's going on over there, then I'll take a look over here. And what that models is like, I'm not like, you have to show up first. I'm not going to be the one to go first. And that's just not leadership. And it creates a clearing. The clearing that gets created there is you go first. So imagine being on the other side of that clearing. What you're going to draw out of that person is you go first. So now you're both in this clearing that's been created going, you go first, and no one's going to go first. And so what we can create in these moments is like, hey, I want to take this on for me. Doesn't necessarily feel good, but I want to take it on for me. Okay, we're back. My camera got a little choppy for a sec. I'm going to take this on for me, and I'm going to appreciate you, and I'm not going to need you to do anything. And when we show up with that commitment to transformation in ourselves and truly as an act of generosity, it creates a clearing for the person to step in. And if they don't, well, the beautiful thing is we're not attached. So we don't need them to step in anyhow. And that's what allows them to step in. As soon as we feel someone pulling at us, we naturally resist it. So the more you can let go of the need for someone to look on their side, the more likely they are to do so, and the less it fucks you up when they don't. So that's like an example of how I work with my shadow. And then I'm going to give you a much more succinct version, and then we'll move on to David's question here about third stage leadership. The other example, one of the most easy for me to spot parts of my shadow is a function of the connection I am. So you've probably got this sense if you've ever spent time with me, and maybe even just in this, like the way I show up in these conversations and speak to people in the comments and all that, like who I am is connection. You put me in a room and that room is more connected. And like most people who are connection, at certain times in my life, I learned that connection's dangerous and scary, so withdraw from it, which leads to the introversion part of connection's shadow. I'm just going to harp on this point because I really think the world's getting introversion and extroversion wrong. And so I'm going to be right about it here. Connection as a quality of being creates two shadows. One shadow looks like extreme glib extroversion, and one shadow looks like extreme shy introversion. And the deeper truth is that those people are both manifestations of the shadows of connection. So people that are like, well, Adam, I just can't talk to people because who I am is an introvert, they're missing the point and they're locking themselves in a box. I say, actually, what if who you are is connection and you've just learned to be introverted when you're scared? Now what? What if we tried that on for a bit? That's a context that'll change your life if you're one of these people. Nevertheless, soapbox complete. Nevertheless, I have that part of me too. Like I get shy. I get afraid of connecting people. I'm worried I'm going to be too much. I'm worried I'm going to be not enough. I'm worried it's going to be awkward. I'm worried that they're not going to know what to say to me. I'm worried I'm not going to know what to say to them. I'm afraid of small talk. What if it's awkward and weird? All of that stuff is alive for me. And so when I go to events, which I'm pretty reliable to get myself to now, but I want to be clear that like every time before an event, any event, there is a aching feeling in the pit of my stomach and I feel a little bit sick and I have voices in my heads like maybe I won't show up, maybe I'll cancel, maybe this person will cancel. I hope they cancel. Wouldn't that be great if they cancel? Maybe this event's not going to be that blah 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 blah. And all of that fear has me want to like turn around and walk back home. These days, I'm pretty good at like, I make a declaration, I put it on my calendar, and I show up even though that voice is there. But in the past, it's taken some resistance or some support to get over my resistance. And what happens these days is that I practice being willing to go out even though I'm scared. I practice being willing to show up even though I'm scared. And I find that what really supports me in overcoming my fear is telling people I'm going to be there. So, for example, I'm a part of this networking group now. It's I guess we call it like a men's brotherhood. So it's a men's group of a bunch of people. It's called METAL, and it stands for Music, Entertainment, Technology, Arts, and Leadership. And so it's men from around the world that are really committed to deep work, getting together, connecting. And they have this big event every Saturday where they bring in speakers. And a couple of people that I've just been in conversation with invited me to this thing. And I was like, oh, it's amazing. I totally want to come. And then it sat on my calendar for 2 fucking months. Every Saturday, ping, metal. And I'd be like, delete, not going to go to that. And so what had to happen was I had to tell those two guys, hey, I'm going to come to this weekend's metal. I'm excited. What do I need to do? And they're like, well, I already told you, but here's what you need to do. That is a structure that supports me to overcome my shadow. What my shadow would have me do is just keep deleting it. It would have me have that thing on my calendar and like, yeah, it's on my calendar, so I'm going to go to it someday. At least I'm doing that, and then just keep deleting it. And I can do that, and it's comfortable in the moment. And the hard part about our shadows is they're very empowering for us. Like we will be empowered in that choice. E.g., oh, I'm so glad I canceled going to metal because then my wife and I got to hang out and we had the hot tub and we made love and we got to eat delicious breakfast that we cooked. Oh, what a good decision. Which is fine, except that's the pattern. So every week for the rest of my life, I'm doing something that I'm empowered by, but that is not the thing I say I'm committed to doing. And so that's the other way I work with my shadow, and that a lot of my clients end up working with their shadow is we create structure sufficient to overcome our resistance. Your structure can be anything. I had a client just recently pledge money to Trump if he didn't do what he said he was going to do. And he was really clear. He was like, it's not, we did a bunch of distinguishing. Like he got to see what was really at play. But just because we can see with altitude what's going on, we're still going to have resistance because our fear is still there. The only way your fear goes away is by taking the action. And so he was like, I can see what's going on and I just keep resisting it and having excuses. And so we looked like, okay, well, what structure would support you? And he said, well, I know you told a story about one of your clients donating to Trump, and I think that might help me. And sure enough, he's created miracles over the past couple of weeks from his structure that supported him. He was very clear. He's not sending it. No, Trump's getting no money of his. And I want to be clear, this is not about Trump. If Biden's your person that you would not donate money to, great, make it Biden. If it's the NAMBLA, the North American Man Boy Love Association, like whatever, it doesn't really matter. The point is creating structures that support us to overcome our resistance. Here's another example. If you have resistance to cleaning your house, one structure that can support that is set up a dinner party. Invite people to come to your house for dinner. For me and Bay and I, that is a structure that really supports us to clean our house. We're like, fuck, people are coming. We don't want the house to look ugly. We want them to feel welcome and in this warm house. Great. Invite them over. And then sure enough, the day before, we're like, I wish people weren't coming over because we have to do all this stuff. But then we do all that stuff and we have an amazing time. Here's something I want to share. If you know Bay and or myself, you probably would think like, wow, those people just love being around people. It just must be so fun to go to parties and stuff as them. I don't know, maybe you feel that, maybe not. And it is. It is fun for us to be us, and it's fun to go to parties and we enjoy them. But the truth is that before any social gathering, both Bay and I have a great deal of resistance. And so that is how the shadow works. And it's often like on the outside, we're like, what? That's crazy. Who you are is this. But that's the nature of this stuff, right? We're most resistant to owning the light that we are. And so who I am is connection. And yet it's one of the things I'm most afraid. It's often where my edge lies. It's like, oh, here's a new level of person for me to connect with. It's scary and edgy. Okay. David wants me to talk on the third stage of leadership, both with clients and especially when having to clean any mess in intimate relationships. And I put in here practicing leadership in the third stage. Well, let me talk about it this way. The first thing that I want to say about leadership is that pretty much any conversation about leadership is not leadership. And the reason for that is that leadership is in the moment. Leadership is who you're being in this moment and then in the next moment. This is why when people are like, when people join my leadership teams and start to bristle at the feedback I was giving them, they would point to, this is dumb, Adam. I have 10 years of leadership, blah, 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 blah. Which, first of all, is like, why are you here if you don't want to learn from me? But second, they're missing the point entirely. It doesn't matter if you were born CEO of Budweiser and then from the age of 0 all the way to 53 when you're now in front of me, you were a leader. That's irrelevant because all that there is right here, right now, the way you're showing up in this moment. And so any conversation about leadership is necessarily not leadership. In the Tao Te Ching, a book by Lao Tzu, which is a brilliant book and quite esoteric and can be a little challenging to read, and at the same time, it's very simple and easy to read. The first, I can't remember how many tenets of the Tao there are, the Tao being the way. And the first tenet is the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. What they're saying here is it's basically the same idea. The thing we can use words to describe is not really the thing itself. So anytime we're having a conversation about leadership, at best, it's like a finger pointing to the moon, but it's not the actual moon. So we want to make sure it doesn't mean don't use words then, just sort of blink leadership into the space. We have to use words. It's the best tool we have. But it's important not to get confused with this idea that if I've read a lot about leadership, now I'm a good leader or something along those lines, because leadership is forged in the moment. You'll see this with people that have lots of leadership books and are really proud of that fact. And it's like, yeah, but how is their being? Do they show up as a leader? How about now? What about now? What about when this happens? How about now? Oh, they're relying on the rules and the precepts in the books that they wrote or that they read, but they're not actually showing up as a leader. They're just reiterating and trying to do rules that they thought would help in this particular situation. I'm just going to read what you wrote, Carl. Totally relate to the shadow aspects of connection. Awesome, man. Glad to hear it. Funny, right? Isn't it funny how these shadows are like, what? That's bonkers, but it also makes complete sense. Our shadow often, it's confusing at times because it looks like the opposite of who we actually are. And so this is why people often ask themselves the question like, well, what's my zone of genius? Or someone's like, what's your zone of genius? And it's such a bad question because, someone who is commitment will show up as flaky. And then from their flakiness, like that's their shadow. Commitment shadow, one side of it is flaky. The other side is overly committed, kind of enslaved. So their shadow is flaky, and then they use their shadow to create a career. So they go into the world and they create a career that rewards being flaky and not committing. So maybe they're like someone who starts a lot of projects. They're a blue sky thinker. And then a well-meaning coach goes, what's your zone of genius? And they're like, well, I'm really good at starting blue sky projects, so that must be it. And that coach is like, yeah, it's totally your zone of genius. And it's like, no, you're actually reinforcing their shadow. That's their zone of excellence. It's the thing that they're really good at doing, but it's not who they truly are at their core. And so I really think that there's a disservice often done because of this counterintuitive nature of how our shadow has us show up and the actual truth underneath it. Anyhow, leadership, right? We're talking about leadership, which is not leadership. It's not the same. So I'm trying to think of how David didn't like the trouble here, David, I'm going to speak to you directly is I'm not on third stage leadership, both with clients and especially when having to clean up any mess in intimate relationships. So maybe I'm just going to take a swing and I have no idea if this is going to really nail the mark. So let's lay out these distinctions for leadership. I don't know anyone else I just created these. It's inspired by David Data's first, second, and third stages of practice. So the first stage of leadership is where our focus is entirely on other people. So and I'm talking about leadership as a quality of being, a way of showing up in the world. So at the first stage, our attention is entirely on what do other people think, How do I not upset other people? We're very focused on the people around us and not ruffling too many feathers, et cetera, et cetera. That's where the predominant focus we have goes. And so from this stage, we will do things like neglect our well-being because this person needs us. So you can see like a lot of this stage of leadership, nursing would be a good example of this. Like, God bless them. People in nursing are often they find their way into that career because they're predisposed to put someone else's needs above their own. This does not mean that there's not an opportunity for all three stages of leadership in that particular practice, but it's a great example of how the first stage of leadership looks. Oh my God, I've worked 12-hour shift, but now there's more people coming in. There will always be more people coming in, and they need me for another 4 hours, so I'm going to work another 4 hours. Holy crap, 16 hours. That's insane. So first stage of leadership, the focus is entirely on others. Or I should say predominantly the focus is on other people. The second stage of leadership is the focus becomes entirely on you. So at this stage, you hear people say things like, I'm a truth teller. I just tell what I want. I'm not going to censor myself. My truth. And if you don't like it, you can move on. And so at this stage of leadership, that's where the focus is. It's like what is most important, what I'm most committed to is expressing my truth into the world. I am no longer going to shut myself down. So to some extent, that's a bit of growth from the first stage, because at least now you're putting your well-being first. At least now you're putting yourself first. At least now you're not censoring yourself just to make other people happy, which is a recipe for your own unhappiness. In this new stage, you're saying what you believe needs to be said. So this will be like an example of second stage leadership would be someone in a meeting, a team meeting, being like, this is stupid, and I think Reggie is a fuckface, and I think he's wrong for what he said, and I hate this. That may be totally true for that person. And at the second stage of leadership, they'll argue, well, what do you want me to do? Because that's my truth. Like, are you saying don't have that truth? Do you want me to just suck it up? Do you want me to just stuff that? I'm not going to censor myself any longer. So you can hear when there is a impact caused in the second stage of leadership that is not positive, not moving us towards what we want, the person practicing second stage leadership goes back and points to the first stage of leadership as like sort of the justification for why I'm here. I'm not going back there. Here's where I am. The third stage of leadership transcends both of these. So it's not so much a lateral move as a transcendent move. It's one that allows for you to show up in all of these different ways of being that are caught in the first and second stage. And the reason for that is because our commitment is now not to other people, not to ourselves, but to something greater than ourselves. So, for example, to Mahatma Gandhi's commitment that the British would leave India through peaceful resistance. Nelson Mandela's commitment that apartheid would end in South Africa. And when we were practicing leadership, and it doesn't have to be that grandiose, right? It could be like my commitment is that I model cleaning up the messes I make. My commitment is to responsibility, first and foremost. You can't have a commitment where you're like, my commitment is responsibility, yours. I can't be committed to your responsibility because that's putting the commitment out there. I can only be committed to responsibility, and then I have to model responsibility. So at this third stage, both of the things in the first and second stage are possible, meaning there might be a point where, well, let's do it this way. So like I might be really committed to well-being, like as a concept as a whole, like well-being really matters. And so at the first stage of leadership, someone might be exhausted. They've been working 7-hour days and their friend says, hey, can you help me move? And they're like, oh, fuck. Yes, because I don't want to let this person down and they've helped me in the past and I need to blah, 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 blah. So they're choosing to support that other person at the expense of their own well-being. And that makes sense because their commitment is to others. It kind of occurs like generosity, except it doesn't really work. It's hard to be generous when your cup is completely empty. It'd be like a beggar giving you money. You'd be like, it doesn't really work. It's weird. So that's the first stage of leadership. At the second stage of leadership, it might be like, no matter what, My well-being is placed first and foremost. So you'd ask me to move, and I'd be like, I'd like to, but I go to the gym at this time every day, and I only got 7 hours of sleep last night. So no, it's a hard no. Ask me tomorrow. I'll help you tomorrow. I'll plan for it. So everything is filtered through me. The priority is my well-being. The highest level of commitment, the third stage of leadership, we might sort of take a look at that, and someone's like, hey, can you help me move? Hold on, this is a little tricky example. I've painted myself into a bit of a corner because it's kind of a weird example. Let me just see if I can find the place here. Well, this will be a bit clumsy. It's not going to be my best dismount. But at that third stage of leadership, there's going to be points where someone's going to ask me to move, and I'm going to say, no, I'm not. I'm not. I'd love to help you, and I really want to, but I just, I- I'm exhausted, and I've been helping people move all week, and I'm sorry. I have to source myself. If you want to do it later, I'm happy to do it, but I really have to put that well-being first and foremost. And there are also going to be points where someone says, hey, can you help me move? And I've only had 5 hours of sleep. And I'm like, wow, I'm really committed to well-being as a whole, as a concept. And what I get is this partner of mine has not slept in days. He's exhausted because we've been working on something together, and now he needs me to move. And even though I'm tired too, I'm going to choose into this because what I'm committed is to the greater concept of well-being rather than just mine or just theirs. So the most important point here is that at third stage leadership, we transcend you or me. There's something beyond just what do I want or what's true for me. So the other example I'll give is that at that third stage, when I'm in a board meeting and I'm bored and I think Reggie's being a fuckhead, the question I'm in is not what's true for me and when do I bellow it. The question is, what would best serve what we are trying to create in this room right now? Is it for me to express boredom and frustration with Reggie? Or is there a different thing for me to do? So what this does is it opens up a wider range of options to us. At the second stage of leadership, they will protest this. They will say, no, you're censoring me. We are not censoring you. We're broadening your range. So you have more options available. And as a leader, your job is to maximize the number of options you have available, not by never committing or something weird like that, but by being open and available, by having the ability to choose any of those rather than resistant and protective of any particular thing. Okay, long description. Now let's talk about what David's asking here. Third stage of leadership, both with clients and especially when having to clean any mess and intimate relationships. So I think actually I've already kind of given an example of this, so I'm just going to point back to it. In that friendship conversation I talked about where my friend said, hey, you really took up a lot of space, I'm really clear that my commitment in that conversation is it's not I'm right about what I'm right about. It's not my friend needs to do his work. My commitment is to model being responsible. My commitment really is leadership. And I believe that leaders take responsibility free of attachment. And so even though there's a part of me, the second stage leadership part of me is like, fuck you, you're doing this thing. I'm really committed to something beyond that. And so I don't stop at that second stage. I go to like, hey, what from my third stage practice is there for me to take on? How is there for me to show up as a leader in this moment? Where is there for me to practice responsibility? Not not because I'm doing this for him, right? I'm not practicing that for my friend. It's not that he doesn't get benefit. Like I'm committed to that friendship too, but like my higher level of practice is to practicing leadership, to modeling responsibility free of attachment. And so that serves both he and I, but those aren't the places I'm choosing from. The place I'm choosing from is what's my highest commitment? It's to model leadership, to practice responsibility free of attachment. Great, I'm choosing from that place. When you're practicing leadership from this third stage, what it frees you from is making choices from how you feel. Most of us are imprisoned by how we feel. I don't want to feel bored. I don't want to feel like I have to do something. I don't want to feel constrained. And then what that does is your feelings Here's another one. I want to feel motivated before I write. I don't want to write if I don't feel motivated. Great. What that does is it makes what you create and how you show up in the world at the effect of how you feel in the moment. And that's awesome if the life you want to create exists entirely inside of the range of feelings that you're willing to be with. Like if you're like, I just want to feel happy, great. That's fine if all of the impact you want to have in the world is going to be created, like is creatable solely from happiness. But at least for me and a lot of the people committed to something greater than themselves, it requires a willingness to be with much more than happiness. Like, can you imagine if Gandhi was like, look, I want India out of here, or sorry, Britain out of here, and I'm only willing to feel happy. We'd be like, you're dumb. I mean, people still said he was dumb, but like that would be even crazier. And and so when we're committed to something greater than ourself, what happens is when we wake up and we're like, I don't feel like writing, we can choose from that commitment to something greater than ourselves in the moment. This is what has us do heroic things, is because of our commitment to something greater than the way I feel in the moment. Second stage leadership is often at the effect of how you feel in the I feel bored. I feel like I have to share this. I'm going to share it. I'm not going to censor myself. Third stage is like, I feel bored, but I'm committed to us creating unison on this team and to really like supporting the leader that's leading this conversation right now. So what's the way for me to show up that's best going to empower them as a leader in this moment? Maybe not spitting that I'm bored into their face. Maybe that would be the thing. Thank you, Lindsay. So part of the way we can practice third stage leadership is to get clear on what we're committed to that is greater than ourselves. If it's a project we're talking about, what's the result? And is it a result greater than just, I want to feel good or I want to make a bunch of money? And then get supported to stay in that commitment. This is often like, this is the reason people end up hiring me. When people end up working with me, it's because they've gotten present to a commitment that's greater than themselves. Working with me is very uncomfortable for a whole bunch of reasons, least of which is the financial investment. And and additionally, most people don't have that financial investment and they're scared of what it's going to take to create it. Either the work they'll have to do, the money they'll have to borrow, or what they'll have to put at risk or whatever. And so from how they feel, we don't make those kind of investments from how we feel. And if we do make an investment from that place, it's fleeting at best because our feelings are fleeting. So we're like, I'm in, I'm so excited. And then the next day we wake up and we're like, oh no, the excitement has been replaced by fear. I'll write Adam an email saying, it's not you, it's me, blah, blah, blah. Now it's just not the right time. All of it's fine. It's more, I want to illustrate that the steps that really move heroic people forward, or the things that cause heroism, that have people step courageously into their lives, are often granted by being committed to something greater than yourself, putting something beyond the way you feel, beyond what's comfortable, beyond any of that stuff, putting yourself at cause to create something that's greater than merely you. This is what creates the leaders we truly admire. 11:16. I got time for one last thing. So let me see here. What do I want to create? What do I want to talk about? Oh, let's talk about increasing the velocity inside your pattern. So I'm going to use a metaphor to describe this and then explain how that plays out in our lives. So imagine this is a metaphor for everyone. Imagine coming upon someone and you notice that they're in a hole. Now, the way I usually ask people is, what do you imagine a coach would do in this situation? So take a second to imagine, well, what does a coach do when they come upon someone who's in a hole? I'll pour more tea while you imagine this. So what most people answer is some flavor of how do you want to get out of that hole? Or hey, do you want help building a ladder? Or something along those lines. And what a coach actually does is they go, hey, I notice you're in a hole. That's it. I'll come back to that. But let's just look at that person in a hole. So first of all, every single one of us are in holes. Not because holes are bad, but just because we get into holes. That's the nature of us. The metaphor of the hole represents wherever you happen to find yourself stuck, whatever problem you've determined is present in your life. So what most people think when they see someone else in a hole is, great, let's get you out of that hole, buddy. How do you want to get out of that hole? And for most people, they'll be like, let's help me build, I need a ladder, I need a ladder. And so the coach, the consultant, the whatever, works with that person to craft a ladder, and then the person climbs out of the hole. Amazing, right? You're out of the hole, hooray. That's so beautiful. Except, what if the problem is not that you are in a hole? What if the problem is that in your life, you continue to blunder into holes unwittingly? You just walk and you're like, holy crap, I'm in another hole. Then what has helping you build a ladder achieved? Here's what it has helped you achieve. It has sped up the process of you iterating through this cycle. What I mean by that is now you're able to build a ladder. What that's going to do is you're going to fall into the next hole and you're going to go, fuck, I'm in a hole again. I need to build a ladder. And so you build it. And then you get out of the hole a little faster than last time. And then you walk and then you blunder into another hole. Fuck, I'm in a hole. And this time you're starting to build up some steam. You're learning how to build a ladder better. And you might even approach someone and be like, hey, I need some help building ladders faster because I notice I seem to fall into these holes and I got to get out of them because I got shit to do and the hole's blocking me. And so this is how we go about our life. This is what most of the change we attempt to affect in our lives is like, is we are trying to build a better ladder faster, stronger, harder. And what that does is it simply increases the velocity with which we move through our cycle, right? The faster I get you out of the hole, if we haven't distinguished that the problem is you walking into holes, the faster you fall into the next one. And so what tends to happen is initially people feel very empowered. They're like, hell yeah, got out of that hole. Now I know how to make a ladder. I can teach other people how to make ladders. I can sell them the ladder technique. They won't blunder into the hole as well. And then over time, you notice you keep blundering into holes and you keep building ladders. And then what we do is we start to relate to ourselves as like, oh, I'm someone who builds ladders. And oh, my zone of genius must be building ladders. This is kind of like I'm just giving you this wacky metaphor for the same thing we've earlier talked about, but this is what tends to happen. And so the takeaway from this particular distinction is to really get that what most of us do in our lives left to our own devices is that we get better at speeding up the pattern. Now, the nice thing about getting out of the hole is you don't instantly fall back in one. So it's not like you just climb out and fall right back. You get moments of reprieve where you're not in the hole. That's part of your pattern too. So it's like, oh, I'm doing good. I fall into a hole. I wonder what's going on. I figure out I'm in a hole. I build a ladder. I get out. I'm doing good. And so we think, caught inside our pattern, oh, this part of the pattern where I'm outside of the hole, what I need to do is maximize that. That need to maximize it, all of that is part of the same pattern. And we can't see the pattern for its wholeness. We only see the thing immediately in front of us. And so the irony here is that a lot of untrained coaches, a lot of well-meaning friends and counselors and coaches and teachers, what they're actually doing is supporting us to hasten our pattern. They move us through it faster and faster, but no real transformation happens. And this is what leads people to initially feeling empowered, then starting to feel disillusioned, and then eventually they become resigned. Eventually, given enough time and enough years spent doing this, where people end up is, you know what? I'm just the sort of person that spends some time in holes, and I just need to learn to empower that. So that's the point where we get resigned and we give up ever not falling into holes. It just becomes a part of who we are. And that's where we end up. So our job as coaches, as leaders, as people that are committed to someone's transformation is not to help them get out of a hole. It's to help them see how they're creating holes in their life. help them see how this whole pattern looks and how they're architecting all of it unwittingly. Okay, I'm going to plug a few things, then we're going to wind up. Here's what I'm going to plug for you. The Creating Clients course, you should take it. You should take it if you are interested any in doing anything where you need to bring people along with you. Because what we are untraining, what we're sort of removing is the story most of us have around selling people, convincing people, bringing people along with us. Oh, I got to bulldoze them. Oh, why don't they just do what I tell them to do? Oh, okay, this person said no. I don't want to put all of those conversations. We are dissolving those. And what gets created for you instead of that is the beautiful, beautiful gift of your birthright. Your birthright is learning how to bring people along with you, learning how to have people say yes to what you are offering them, not by convincing them or fooling them, but simply as an act of serving them. I don't mean serving them the way some people mean it when they're like, yeah, you're serving people as you take them through this script. It's not serving them like a trick. It's serving them the same way you serve your friends by being in relationship with them. And so that's what we create in this course. We help you create the transformation necessary to really relate to selling or creating prosperity in an entirely different light. It's absolutely transformational. It's 10 weeks long and it's a very low cost. It's a mere $1,000. Starts again in January. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to my website, adamquiney.com/client creation, all one word. There's one more thing I wanted to plug. Oh, wait, what was it? It was Get Lit. So if you haven't yet checked out my podcast, Get Lit, please do so. It's awesome. A lot of, we do longer form on I do longer form on these Friday conversations. Get Lit is like a short 20-minute snippet. So it's often a conversation about some particular distinction around leadership. Um, we have series like I keep saying we. I have a series called Leadership Sand Traps, which are traps or pitfalls that people will do and show up with as a leader that keeps them stuck. So one example would be the sand trap of, oh wow, what a breakthrough. And this is that kind of quality for certain people to find everything as a breakthrough. And we talk about how that shows up as someone who's having their leadership developed and how this shows up on the other side when the leader has this sand trap and is developing people and why this is a sand trap and how this gets in the way and what to do about it. So that's one example of a series that we have on that podcast. And another one is called Along the Spectrum, where we talk about these qualities of being. Presence, radiance was the most recent one. Connection, we've talked about, brilliance, and I'm not sure what I'll do this. I'm recording a bunch this week, so I'll see what kind of quality. But anyhow, it's a super awesome conversation. You should definitely subscribe. You should share it with the entire world. Post spam people with it. Force them to listen to it. It's awesome content. I love you guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Lindsay, Carl, Mia, Tommy, Vera. Who else do we have here? Andrew, Emmanuel, Mark, David. Really appreciate all of you for being with me on this Friday morning. It's a cool way to start the weekend for me. It's really fun. Love you guys. Have a great weekend. Bye bye. Oh, I don't want to quit. Yeah, I want to end. That's what I want to do. End this video, Facebook.